Well, today we begin with our top story. 7.5 years after the massacre of at least 2,000 suspected Taliban prisoners of war during the Bush administration-led invasion of Afghanistan, the incident and its apparent cover-up might finally be the subject of an investigation. Over the weekend, President Obama said, quote, "There are responsibilities that all nations have, even in war." And he told CNN's Anderson Cooper that he was not opposed to investigating the Dasht-e-Leili massacre of November 2001.
It now seems clear that the Bush administration resisted efforts to pursue investigations of an Afghan warlord named General Dostum, who was on the CIA payroll. It's now come out there were hundreds of Taliban prisoners under his care who got killed. Right. Some were suffocated in a steel container, others were shot, possibly buried in mass graves. Would you call for an investigation into possible war crimes in Afghanistan?
Yeah, the indications that this had not been properly investigated just recently was brought to my attention. So what I've asked my national security team to do is to collect the facts for me that are known, and we'll probably make a decision in terms of how to approach it once we have all the facts gathered up.
But you wouldn't resist categorically an investigation?
I think that there are responsibilities that all nations have, even in war. And if it appears that our conduct in some way supported violations of the laws of war, then I think that we have to know about that.
President Obama's comments follow initial statements from other officials in his administration Friday, who said the Pentagon and the FBI had no jurisdiction over the mass killing by a U.S.-backed warlord, General Abdul Rashid Dostum. A Pentagon spokesman told the Associated Press, quote, "There is no indication that U.S. military forces were there or involved or had any knowledge of this, so there was not a full investigation conducted because there was no evidence that there was anything from a DOD perspective to investigate." The infamous Dasht-e-Leili massacre is back in the news in the wake of new evidence published in a New York Times report last Friday and Saturday that shows the Bush administration blocked at least 3 federal investigations into the alleged war crimes. The article is by journalist James Risen. He notes that, quote, "American officials had been reluctant to pursue an investigation because the warlord, General Abdul Rashid Dostum, was on the payroll of the CIA and his militia worked closely with United States Special Forces in 2001. Well, Dostum served as a defense official in the Karzai government. Last year, he was suspended for threatening a rival at gunpoint and lived in Turkey in exile. But ahead of these August 20th elections that are coming up, Karzai has invited Dostum back to the country and reinstated him as military chief of staff. This is a warning from General Dostum back in late 2001 when he was the U.S.-backed commander of Northern Alliance forces and traveling around the country to get remaining Taliban to surrender. This excerpt is from the award-winning documentary from Jamie Doran's Afghan Massacre, Convoy of Death, that had its premiere on Democracy Now! 6 years ago.
If you upset me, I'm telling you. No one except God up there and me down here will care about you. You will lose your honor. This is very serious.
General Dostum.
Your village might be looted. Your family will be in danger. They'll be killed. They'll be raped. There will be no safety for them. I'm telling you straight. You must be honest with me. I'm being honest with you here.
Filmmaker Jamie Doran also interviewed then-Pentagon advisor Richard Pearl about the administration's decision to ally with a warlord like Dostum.
You have to balance out competing interests. Obviously, we would much rather be aligned with Mother Teresa. That wasn't possible in those circumstances. It does lead to a responsibility on our part for trying to help reshape Afghanistan along more humane and democratic lines. And I think that's exactly what we should be doing.
I'm joined right now by two guests. Susanna Sirkin is in the studio with us here in the Firehouse, the Deputy Director of Physicians for Human Rights, the group that discovered the mass graves in 2002, and that's been calling for a full investigation for years. And we're joined from Washington, D.C. by the Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter James Risen. His latest article on how the Bush administration impeded investigations into the massacre and the mass graves is called U.S. in Action Seen After Taliban POWs Died. Risen is also the author of the 2006 book, The Secret History of the CIA and the Bush Administration. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! James Risen, let's begin with you. This piece that appeared first online on the Times on Friday and in the paper on Saturday. What is the latest that you have found?
Well, basically, what I tried to look at was I tried not to get caught up in something that I think in the past has slowed down some of the efforts by journalists to look into this. I think in the past, one of the mistakes some journalists made was to try and prove a direct involvement by the U.S. personnel in the massacre itself. I frankly don't believe that any U.S. military personnel were involved in the massacre. And, you know, U.S. Special Forces troops who were traveling with Dostum have long maintained that they knew nothing about this. And, you know, so I tried not to go down that road. What I wanted to find out was what happened after the massacre in Washington and look at the role of senior U.S. policymakers as the reports came in of this massacre. What did they do or not do about the responsibility of the United States to look into what had happened and what a U.S.-backed warlord had done. So I tried to look at it from a Washington perspective, which in the past had not really been done by other journalists. And so that's what I found was that whether or not U.S. personnel were involved or had foreknowledge, knowledge ahead of time or knowledge contemporaneously with the massacre, what I did find was, after the fact, a series of reports came in from different organizations to the Bush administration, basically warning them, you have to look into this in one way or the other, that the evidence was overwhelming, that something had happened, and that it was the responsibility of the Bush administration to look into this, or at least to push for an international investigation, because Dostum had been on the CIA payroll, was part of a U.S.-backed alliance that was taking over Afghanistan. And what I found was time after time in different agencies and in the White House, Bush administration officials repeatedly ignored evidence or just decided or discouraged efforts to open investigations into the massacre.
You talk about the three different times and the different U.S. Agencies, the FBI, the Pentagon, the State Department. How did each block the investigation?